I was born in Las Vegas, one of 7 children in a military family. My childhood was a mix of ballet rehearsals and strict rules. I danced as a lead in the Lido de Paris show and enjoyed the glamour of performance. But home was not always safe. When a migraine sent my father into a rage, one of my sisters whispered that I should leave before he returned home, warning that his anger would find me. At 15, I ran away, bouncing between a boyfriend's car in San Francisco, an uncle's house near Santa Cruz, and the back seats of parked cars. I was homeless and lonely, but I still had dreams. I wanted to be a dancer, a mother, and maybe to find a bit of freedom on my own terms. By September 1978, I was desperate to get home. That evening, I stood near Berkeley, California with a sign pointing south and a backpack full of teenage hopes. 2 other hitchhikers waited beside me. My feathered bangs framed a face far younger than my years, and I still believed people were essentially good. When a balding, grandfather-type man in a blue van pulled over, he offered to take only me, despite the empty van. The other hitchhikers warned me not to go with a man who seemed eager to isolate me, but I was exhausted and wanted to be anywhere but alone. I ignored the milk jugs of alcohol he filled and drank from as he drove, and I slept because I hadn't slept properly in days. When I woke up, it was dark, and the van was heading east toward Nevada. Panic pricked my skin. I accused him of going the wrong way and grabbed a stick I'd found near the seat to threaten him. He turned the van around, and for a moment I felt in control. Soon, he pulled over again, saying he needed to relieve himself. As I bent outside the van to tie my shoe, thinking I might outrun him, I never saw the sledgehammer swing that cracked my skull. I regained consciousness bound naked in the back of the van, his heavy body hovering over me. He violated me repeatedly throughout the night, ignoring my pleas and promises that I wouldn't tell if he let me go. Each time he slept, I could only stare through the van's window at the rising sun, my wrists burning from the ropes. I prayed for morning, but what daylight brought was a new horror. As dawn broke, he dragged me outside. "You want to be free? I'll set you free," he said. He produced a hatchet. With 3 swings, he hacked through my left arm below the elbow. Hot blood gushed down my side. Shock numbed my brain, but not enough to spare me the pain. He began on my right arm. I kicked, screamed, and fought as he chopped. I remember seeing my own severed right hand still gripping his arm, a surreal and grotesque image. Perhaps thinking I was dead, he picked me up and threw me over a 30-foot cliff into a drainage culvert. There, in the cold concrete tube, I lay broken and bleeding with 4 fractured ribs. As my body numbed, I heard a voice, clear and insistent. "If you go to sleep, he will do this to someone else. You can't let that happen." That thought jolted me more than my injuries. I shoved the ragged ends of my arms into dirt and mud to pack the wounds and slow the bleeding, holding the stumps above my heart to keep as much blood inside as possible. I began to crawl up the ravine. The climb was slow agony. By the time I reached the road again, it was night. I stood naked, covered in blood and dirt, my severed arms raised over my head so the muscles wouldn't spill out, just as my mother had taught me to hold a cut above my heart. I walked along the highway, following the faint sound of cars. 2 young men in a convertible saw me and sped away in fear, leaving me to wonder if my appearance was too horrific to earn help. Finally, a truck stopped. A young couple on their honeymoon had gotten lost. They wrapped me in a rug, placed me in their cab, and sped toward help. At the hospital, doctors told me I'd lost more than half of my blood, and that the remaining blood had turned toxic. Against all odds, I survived. As I recovered, a forensic artist sat with me while I described the man who had mutilated me. My description helped police identify Lawrence Singleton, a 51-year-old former merchant seaman who was arrested at his home. When asked to identify him in court months later, I raised my new silver hook and pointed at him. On the stand, I told the jury what happened. He used a hatchet. He left me to die. My attacker sat only a few feet away during the 1979 trial. As I passed him, he whispered, "If it's the last thing I do, I will finish the job." Fear flooded me, but I continued to testify. Lawrence Singleton was convicted of attempted murder, kidnapping, rape, sodomy, forced oral copulation, and aggravated mayhem. The judge said he wanted to send Singleton to prison for the rest of his life, but the maximum sentence under California law was just 14 years. Singleton received that sentence. He served only 8 years and 3 months, receiving parole for good behavior and participation in a prison work program. The public was outraged. County after county refused to house him. Citizens protested in the streets. Ultimately, he was placed in a trailer on San Quentin prison grounds until his parole expired. To many, including me, it felt like a grotesque parody of justice. When he was released in 1987, I lived in fear. He had promised to finish what he'd started, and now he was free. I moved constantly, living in anonymity and often poverty. My marriage strained under the anxiety. We sometimes stayed in an unheated, abandoned gas station, huddled together with my 2 sons, Luke and Alan, whom I call my little men. With each relocation, I hoped to outrun him. My father collected guns and plotted how he could kill Singleton. The constant media attention after the trial also fractured my relationship with my parents. They were more focused on their own feelings about what had happened than on supporting me. I enrolled in a school for the handicapped and tried to rebuild my life, but my life felt like a public spectacle. One of the few stable joys in my life was becoming a mother. When I was 4 years old, someone asked me what I wanted to be when I grew up. I said, I want to be a mother to the world. After the attack, that desire intensified. I gave birth to 2 sons in the late 1980s. Becoming a mother gave me something big to live for. I learned to build and repair my own prosthetic arms using spare parts from old stereo systems and refrigerators. Prosthetics were expensive, and disability checks and art commissions barely paid the bills. But tinkering gave me independence and a sense of control. My grandfather had also been an artist. Perhaps I inherited his creative streak. Art became my therapy. Ironically, before my attack, I couldn't draw a straight line. Afterward, I discovered that I could create intricate pastel drawings. Making art gave me self-esteem and allowed me to support my family. I sold drawings of strong female figures and family portraits. I even designed specialized prosthetic tools so I could bowl, play pool, or cook. Mentally, recovery was hard. For years, I had recurring nightmares that left me waking up on the floor with broken bones. In one nightmare, I would hear the sound of the axe again. In another, I'd wake up dislocating my shoulder from jumping out of bed. I prayed every day to God to make a space I can breathe in, and every day God gave it to me. Therapy sessions seldom helped. Counselors seemed uncomfortable with my story, and some people reacted with cruelty when I tried to warn them not to hitchhike. I joined support groups but rarely opened up because I felt my family and others took the tragedy harder than I did. I didn't want to be seen solely as a victim. In early 1997, a news story broke that sent me spiraling. Lawrence Singleton had been arrested in Tampa, Florida for murdering a 31-year-old woman named Roxanne Hayes. A house painter had witnessed him attacking her through a window. Roxanne's death dredged up my trauma and filled me with guilt. I had always feared he would hurt someone else, and now my fears were realized. In a TV interview, I called him pure evil and said I was devastated that it had taken another murder for people to realize he should never have been released. I had lived in constant fear because he had vowed in court to finish the job. I believed his friends were stalking me. The arrest angered and worried my 2 children. It was also a strange relief. His arrest meant he was behind bars again and could not reach me. During the penalty phase of Singleton's 1998 murder trial in Tampa, I flew across the country to testify. In front of the jury, I raised my prosthetic hand and pointed at him, identifying him as the man who had mutilated me. I told them I was attacked. I was raped, and I had my hands cut off. News reports said some jurors wiped away tears. Singleton's defense tried to portray him as an old man suffering from dementia and alcoholism. They even tried to blame Roxanne Hayes for her own death. The prosecution drew parallels between my case and Roxanne's murder, noting that 2 women separated by 20 years had climbed into his van and faced the same violence. The jury recommended death. Singleton was sentenced to death and died of cancer in prison in 2001. I later said I regretted that he died before I could look into his eyes and see remorse. Roxanne Hayes' murder shattered a family. Her 3 children sat in the front row of the courtroom, remembering their mother's kindness and love. Her boyfriend told reporters how Roxanne loved stray animals and laughed loudly. Watching her family grieve reminded me of my own family and renewed my commitment to speak for victims. After the trial, I testified before legislative bodies advocating for tougher sentencing laws. California passed legislation, informally called the Singleton Bill, that increased the maximum sentence for crimes involving torture to 25 years to life. I hoped no other survivor would watch their attacker walk free after only a few years. During the 1980s and early 1990s, I traveled around schools and community centers telling young people not to hitchhike. Some students listened, but others mocked me. After a while, their jeers and the constant media attention became too heavy. I stopped public speaking for years. I preferred to live quietly with my sons. Still, I occasionally appeared at rallies for victims' rights. In 1999, I told a crowd at the Ventura County Government Center that I could never fully move on. I will never get over being attacked. I wake up every morning with a constant reminder, but I can move past it. For years, the media have tried to turn my life into a simple redemption arc. The Cinderella who overcomes a brutal assault to build a happy family. Such stories sell magazines, but they often ignore the sleepless nights, poverty, and physical pain that follow. I have joy and gratitude, but I also have fear and struggle. Real people are not symbols. We feel contradictions, and that complexity deserves acknowledgement. While reporters wrote those tidy narratives, I focused on changing laws. After Singleton's early release, I testified before the California legislature about what it meant to lose my arms and watch my attacker walk free. Lawmakers passed the Singleton Bill, raising the maximum sentence for crimes involving torture to 25 years to life. Each time I told my story, I reopened old wounds, but advocacy turned my pain into systemic change. I also built my own prosthetics. Using old stereo and refrigerator parts, I fashioned attachments that let me cook, drive, and paint. Creating these tools gave me independence and taught my sons that adaptability is a form of strength. My story became a cautionary tale for hitchhikers. People magazine covered my life in 1999 and again in 2025, recounting how I crawled up a ravine and flagged down help. They described how I packed my wounds with dirt and climbed 30 feet to safety. They noted that I held my arms above my head to prevent bleeding. They wrote that 2 good Samaritans rushed me to a hospital, where I aided the forensic artist in creating a sketch that led to Singleton's arrest. In those articles, I tried to balance being a survivor with being a mother, an artist, and a woman living with trauma. I wanted people to know that I was not an object of pity, but a person with a complex life. I also protected my privacy fiercely. For years, I refused to reveal where I lived because I feared Singleton or his associates would find me. Even after his death, I remained cautious. When interviewed in 2003, I was living in Gig Harbor, Washington. The community accepted me as Mary, not as the woman without arms. I built a home there for me and my sons, supported by disability payments and sales of my artwork. I found a surrogate mother in my mother-in-law, Pat Platt. After feeling that my own parents couldn't be there for me, I started to relax, letting my guard down enough to draw, garden, and play pool with my sons. When I design prosthetic tools or paint pastel portraits, I feel like I am reclaiming pieces of myself. Almost 5 decades after the attack, I still deal with daily pain. My shoulders ache from holding up my prosthetic arms. Nightmares still intrude. People sometimes call me a symbol of strength or the patron saint of survival. Others fixate on my trauma. Both views reduce me to a character in someone else's narrative. I have learned that life is not a neat story with a linear ending. Pain and joy coexist. Even as I laugh with my sons or lose myself in painting, memories of that night flash back. When I do public speaking now, I tell audiences about the voice I heard in the culvert, telling me not to go to sleep. I still listen to that voice. It reminds me to fight for other victims, to raise my boys with compassion, and to continue living fully despite the constant reminders of what was taken from me. Sometimes people ask how I found the strength to crawl up that embankment. I tell them it wasn't courage so much as desperation. My survival instinct was intertwined with my sense of responsibility. I couldn't bear the thought of my attacker mutilating someone else. That single thought propelled me up the ravine and across the asphalt. Raising my sons brought its own challenges. I worried that my trauma would color their childhoods, and I fought to give them a sense of normalcy. Teaching them to ride bikes or bake cookies was awkward without hands, yet we laughed through the mishaps. When they asked about my scars, I answered honestly but reminded them that evil does not define the world. Watching Luke and Alan grow into compassionate men has been one of the greatest victories of my life. Their existence is the clearest proof that life continues and beauty can emerge from horror. In the years since, that same instinct has guided my advocacy. When I testify in front of lawmakers, I want them to see me not only as a witness to a crime, but as a woman who rebuilt her life and who demands that the justice system recognize the weight of violence. Laws like the Singleton Bill are a direct result of survivors speaking up. Another question I'm often asked is whether I forgive Lawrence Singleton. Forgiveness is complicated. I do not spend energy hating him. Hatred would only give him more of my life. But I do not forgive him. He did not only cut off my arms, he tried to take away my future. He murdered another woman and left her children motherless. He robbed countless people of safety and trust. Forgiveness suggests closure, and there is no closure for what he did. Instead, I choose to live. I choose to be a mother, an artist, a friend. I choose to help change laws so that perpetrators cannot easily reoffend. I choose to tell my story, not because I enjoy reliving it, but because I hope it will prevent another teenager from getting into a stranger's car. Today, decades later, I live with my family in Washington State. My sons are grown and have their own lives. I am still an artist, painting women with strength and vulnerability. I design my own prosthetics and tinker with tools. I still receive disability payments and occasionally sell art to pay the bills. I seldom speak publicly, but when I do, I speak frankly about trauma and resilience. I remind people that survival is not a linear path. Each day, I wake up and feel the weight of my prosthetic arms, the ache in my shoulders, the whispers of old nightmares. Yet each day I also feel gratitude that I lived to raise 2 sons, to make art, and to advocate for change. Life is complicated and lived, not a neat story. That, perhaps, is the most important lesson I can share.